So this here's the Higher 2019 paper 1 and it's question 10 from that paper, where what we're looking at is we're looking at graph transformations. So we're looking at the different types of graph transformation that can exist. Now remember, when we're looking at graph transformations, there's a huge variety we can do. So we can have y equals a f of bx plus c plus d in this general format here. Each of these things does a different thing to the graph. Now this a here, this scales the graph, so it stretches or squashes it in the y direction. But it can also have a second effect where if it's negative, it flips the graph about the x-axis. The b here stretches or squashes the graph in the x direction, so it scales it in that direction there. The c, what that does is that translates the graph in the x direction, i.e. it moves it left or right depending upon the value. And this value of d here translates the graph up and down. So it moves the graph up and down however much we want. Now all of these don't have to take place at the same time. There can be a variety of combinations, or we could have all of them at the same time if the question was being particularly nasty. This one here, we've got just this general format here of k f of x plus a. So in order to get the values of the a and k as we're after here, we have to understand what each of the transformations does. So if we look at the graph here, the original graph is this one that comes down and moves all the way up to there. Now, if we're looking at a is this value here. What this does is this translates the graph up or down. Now we could look at any of the points that were given. So we could look at, if you look here, there's a point given here on the y-axis, or we've got the point given here. However, this one here would be the easiest one to look at. We've got two transformations happening to the graph. We've got the kf of x and we've got the plus a. So two things are going to happen to this point here. However, plus a is going to take this point and shift it. So the plus a is only going to have one effect on that point. The k might have an effect of flipping it, but this is going to translate it up the way. So in order to do that, what that means is I have to be adding on 3, so the value of a has to be equal to 3. Now for the value of k, we then have to look at how the shape of the graph has changed. Now if we were to look at the graph, this k here, what we'd have to realise straight away is that it's flipped. So the graph itself has flipped around the x-axis. So what's happened is this is definitely a negative value. So I can write that down straight away. Now if we were to look at just what happens to this point here based on these two transformations, after realising that the k flipped it, I would notice at this point we go from 2, -1 here to 2, 1. What then happens is the translation would take effect and it would shift it up by 3 to 2, 4. However, that's not where we want it to be. We want it to move up to 2, 5. Now we know this translation up is definitely going to be 3, which means that prior to the translation, this point here actually had to be down here at 2, 2. Now because it's at 2, 1 here, what I have to make sure I do is when I flip it, I've then got to stretch it up by 1 point up to 2. So I've got to double the size of it. So instead of just -1 for the k, what I have to do is make it -2. Because what will happen is this will flip it in the x-axis, but also then double the size of the y value. So this would shift it from 2, -1 up to 2, 1, but then up again to 2, 2. Then I could translate it up by 3 to get to the 2, 5, which is my final bit there. So there we go. I've got the value for a and I've got the value for b based on the information that the graph gives me just by looking at it and remembering what each of the different graph transformations does to the actual graph itself. You need to make sure you know all of these here. What happens with every single one of these and what happens with the combinations of them and what they'll do to the graph overall and how it looks.